Great. All right, good morning. Welcome everyone to the AI and the Constitution Conference. I'm Suzette Malveaux. I'm the director of the Byron White Center for the Study of American Constitutional Law at the University of Colorado Law School. So thank you so much for being here in person and remotely. I'm excited to welcome not only those who are in the state of Colorado, but also those who are really all over the country. So thank you for being here. I first want to do a land acknowledgement and note that as we gather, we honor and acknowledge that the University of Colorado Law School is on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute peoples. I also want to acknowledge that 48 contemporary tribal nations are historically tied to what we think of as the state of Colorado. So as part of the White Center, I'm really proud to be partnering with Silicon Flatirons. This conference merges the White Center's annual Rothgerber conference with the Silicon Flatirons annual Artificial Intelligence Conference. And so it's really a perfect blend of the two areas that both of these centers care very deeply about. So just a little bit about who we are. So the Byron White Center is premised on the belief that informed and an engaged community is essential to our constitutional democracy. Our mission is to support excellence in constitutional legal scholarship, to offer opportunities to our students to promote justice, and to expand public knowledge and informed discussion of the Constitution. Silicon Flatirons also has its mission, and that's to initiate, sustain, and elevate the conversation about technology law, policy, and entrepreneurship, and to inspire, prepare, and place students in these really important areas. Silicon Flatirons, I'm proud to say, was founded by our current Attorney General, Phil Weiser, who is also the former Dean of the law school. So in terms of today's topic, when the White Center was brainstorming about what the topic of the conference should be this year, two things were really clear. First was the rapid advances of AI and how it was infiltrating our lives on every dimension, right? So you think about this tool and you think about this time. And so we were thinking about this, AI is everywhere, whether it's voting, surveillance, privacy, law enforcement, property rights, copyright, free speech, employment, you name it. So that was the first thing that came to mind. Second thing that came to mind was the erosion of fundamental constitutional rights that we have treasured, or at least a threat to some of those rights. So it made sense to consider the role that AI can play and should play, and maybe is already playing when it comes to protecting some of those most cherished rights. Now we're going to explore that question in three different areas, and that's what our three panels are about. So we'll start off our first panel, AI and privacy. So that panel is going to explore the challenges in terms of protecting the right to privacy in the context of this AI explosion. So we'll be looking at, first of all, how do we even define, what do we even consider is sensitive information so that we can protect it. We'll look at the need for data privacy protections that are tailored specifically to minority communities, right? If we think about guarding against exploitation, over surveillance, and political deception. We'll look at some of the promises and also the dangers of law enforcement's use of facial recognition technology, and the efficacy of local laws that require impact assessments when dealing with algorithmic hiring. After that discussion of AI and privacy, we're going to turn to another question, and that really is exploring the opportunities and limitations when AI itself interprets the Constitution and legal documents. So for example, we'll look at some of the potential benefits, things like efficiency, consistency, perhaps less bias. We'll also look at some of the detriments or potential challenges, things like the elimination of discretion and the illusion of AI objectivity. So that panel is going to explore those questions related to legal interpretation and really the role of human judgment, right, when it comes to interpretation of the law. And then our last panel is going to look at AI and AI speech and the First Amendment. So we know that the First Amendment has long protected human beings, right, in terms of listeners and speakers, and corporations as well, to be honest. But what about AI? So we know that with the rapid advancement of AI since basically 2022 has definitely led to an era where AI generated speech can match or even surpass human generated content in terms of sophistication and substance. So that development has raised some pretty serious and complex questions about the First Amendment and AI speech, and really raises this important question about whether or not speech that's generated by machines is protected under the First Amendment. So we'll be taking a close look at some of the various implications of AI-generated speech and First Amendment jurisprudence. Now, a couple things about the format for today. Just so you know, we are going from roughly 9 o'clock to about a little after 4. We are hoping that you can stay for all of the program. We'd love to have you. We get that people have competing demands on their time. So if you need to kind of duck in and dip out, that is totally fine. We welcome you for whatever period of time you can be here. We are going to have a keynote speech, and after that, we'll have our first panel. We'll take a lunch break around 11:45. We'll come back at 1. Please come back at 1. And we'll have our other 2 panels. And then after that, we will all be invited to go and hang out at a reception shortly afterwards, right? So we'll have food and lunch is free and the reception will be fun. So we welcome everybody to come and join us. For those of you who are participating remotely, I'm sure you know that your cameras, your audio are off, but if you need some assistance in terms of tech support, go ahead and put your request in the chat and we'll try to get you some help. For all of you who have registered, which should be everybody here, you'll be getting an email shortly, and so that email will have a survey. We would really appreciate if you would take the time to fill it out, give us some feedback. A recording of the webinar, a recording of our programming, and then also some CLE instructions. So good news to all of my Colorado lawyers, you get 5 general CLE credits. And the students, you can receive Care Pledge credit. So you want to be on the lookout for that. So at this point in time, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker for today. I can't think of a better person for the keynote than my colleague, Harry Surden. Harry is a professor of law here at the University of Colorado Law School. He is also the faculty director of Silicon Flatiron's Artificial Intelligence Initiative. Not only did we get him, but Stanford's lucky enough to have him, where he is associate director of Stanford University's Codex Center for Legal Informatics. Professor Surden is one of the leading scholars in AI and the law. He's the creator of computable contracts, and he has a number of articles that are seminal in this field. Many of you have probably already read some of his work: Structural Rights and Privacy, Machine Learning and the Law, AI and the Law in Overview. These articles are sort of the crux of this field and have been largely cited, widely cited. Professor Surden has a background in computer science and the law. Before he entered academia, he worked as a professional software engineer at Cisco Systems and Bloomberg LP. He's a graduate of Stanford and Cornell, both with honors. And I am honored to be introducing him today as our keynote to kick us off. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here. And thank you to Professor Suzette Malveaux, who is a a superstar in her own right in constitutional law. And thank you for that overly kind introduction. It's been just an honor to be organizing this with you, Suzette, as my co-host here. I also want to thank Dean Innes, the dean of this law school, who could not be here today, as well as Brad Bernthal, who is the executive director of the Silicon Flatirons, who also could not be here today due to personal reasons. I also want to thank the amazing Silicon Flatirons team who helped organize this event: Nate Mariotti, Shannon Sturgeon, Christine McCloskey, Sarah Schnickron, who worked incredibly hard to put this together, the incredible Lindley Bell from the law school, the events coordinator, Michelle Logan and Melanie Kay from the Daniels Fund, who helped organize yesterday's event, all the student volunteers. We have incredible experts from far and wide, as far as Australia and as near as Central Boulder. And most of all, I want to thank you, the audience, for coming here today, both here and online. It's really an honor to be here today to give the keynote presentation. As Suzette, Professor Malveaux said, I'm professor of law here at the University of Colorado, and I also have this computer science and law background. I was a professional software engineer. So a lot of my research is on the intersection of artificial intelligence and law. So let me give you a little bit of an overview of my presentation today. We're going to start out by bringing us all up to speed on what artificial intelligence is and where we've been in the past. Then we're going to talk about what changed in 2022 that's gotten everybody all excited. We're going to look at the current capabilities of AI, the current state of the art as used in law today. And then finally, we're going to look at some of the implications for constitutional law and AI, the subject of this conference. So let's just start out from the beginning. I know many of you have a background in artificial intelligence, but many of you do not. So it's always helpful to bring us up to speed, make sure we're all on the same page. So I'm just gonna start with an overview of artificial intelligence, what it is, and then we'll kind of see its progression. So there's probably no one good definition of artificial intelligence that everyone would agree with. But one definition that I find useful is artificial intelligence, or AI, is using computers to solve problems, make predictions, answer questions, generate creative output, or make automated decisions or actions on tasks that, when humans do that, typically require intelligence. So what does that mean? Well, we're out there in the world, humans are driving cars, we're playing chess, we're writing books. These are all activities that are associated with intelligence. So when we get a computer to do such a task that we normally associate with human intelligence, we refer to that as an artificial intelligence task. So that, of course, is not a particularly a definition everyone will agree on, because intelligence itself doesn't really have a widely agreed upon definition. But for our purposes, we'll think of intelligence as being associated with a series of higher order cognitive skills that are loosely grouped with intelligence. These include planning, problem solving, reasoning, understanding and generation of language, learning, etc. So the important point to say is, when we get a computer to do something that, when humans do it, are normally associated with intelligence, whether it's playing chess or identifying cat pictures or writing poems, computers do it very differently. They do not do it in the same way. So AI, I think, is largely a metaphor to human intelligence. We're getting functionally similar outputs from the computer, but through a very different process internally, and I want to emphasize that. So so this is something that many of you might have seen. This is ChatGPT using GPT-4. So let me just get a sense of the audience here. How many people have actually used ChatGPT before? So almost everybody, I'd say about 90%. How many of you use ChatGPT or something similar on a regular basis, every day or almost every day? So about 40%. And then how many of you regularly use a paid model like GPT-4, a frontier model? So maybe about 30%. Okay, so that's helpful to know. So what we have here today is the interface for ChatGPT, which is It's a chat-based way of interacting with an underlying technology known as GPT, which we'll talk about in a second. You put something that's known as a prompt. A prompt is either an instruction or a question. It's a piece of text that the AI technology, the large language model, responds to. So here I've asked ChatGPT to write a merger agreement. And the reason we would associate this as an artificial intelligence task, because when a lawyer writes a merger agreement, we generally associate it with intelligence or writing documents. So here it is. You can type it in there, and ChatGPT can give you a pretty good first draft of a merger agreement or just about any legal document, a patent, you name it, it can do it. So that's kind of amazing, and that is remarkable. So you might ask yourself, how did we get here? How did we get here? We have these general purpose systems that can do a pretty good, albeit imperfect, job at answering just about anything about any question or topic you can ask. How did we get here with AI? So I think it's helpful to see our journey a little bit in the broader historical context of AI. So I'm going to sort of bring us up to speed quickly. Roughly speaking, in the world of artificial intelligence, you can think about it not just in terms of tasks as we did before, which is the computer driving a car or playing chess or writing a merger agreement, but also according to how do we actually build these systems. So in the history of AI, you can divide it into two rough approaches. The first approach, which dominated from the beginning, we'll talk about, is known as symbolic AI or knowledge representation. But the gist of it is in the early days of AI, we built AI systems mostly by having computer scientists interact with domain experts like lawyers or doctors and manually inputting rules, right? So humans would create rules about, the tax domain or medicine, either in expert systems or, and the overwhelming thing is that it's a top-down approach where a human tries to see the world and implement it in computer code. There's a whole different approach known as machine learning, which has come to dominate the field since 2000. And machine learning is completely different. In machine learning, you give pattern recognition algorithms lots of data, and the algorithms themselves learn the patterns and the rules from data. So it's much less about top-down, manually entered rules, and much more about the machine algorithm discovering the rules from large amounts of data. So if we want to see the timeline of artificial intelligence, AI goes all the way back to the 1950s. From about 1950 roughly to 1990s was the era of symbolic AI. That's where people were constructing rules, and much programming today actually is of this top-down design. So if you use Microsoft Word or Excel, there are programmers in the Pacific Northwest typing a series of rules to make Microsoft Word print when you hit the print button, for example. But this is the era of symbolic logic. Starting from about 1990 to about 2010 was the era of machine learning, largely driven by the internet and the availability of large amounts of digital data in digital form. People started to realize we can use these pattern matching algorithms to start doing interesting things. And in this period, we had self-driving cars. So when you design a self-driving car, you don't tell it, for example, if you see a stoplight, stop, right? So that would be a kind of manually coded rule. Rather, you train these systems, use these machine learning systems, kind of learn this after showing them lots of examples of good and bad driving over time, and it begins to learn these rules on its own. So this is a really interesting era, 1990 to 2010. We'll call this the era of narrow machine learning. And that's because we say narrow because these were good at very specific tasks that they were trained on. So a self-driving car couldn't, for example, play chess, right? Because those are two different tasks. But a chess AI machine was very good at playing chess, and a self-driving car machine was very good at driving cars. What started to happen about 2011 was the era of deep learning. And this was largely driven by a few things, notably hardware improvements. A bunch of people started noticing that, hey, these graphics cards that I use to play these games on my computer are also pretty good at AI. And they revived kind of this long dormant technology known as neural networks, which has been around from at least since the 1940s, and said, what if we brought this back and started implementing it in this new technology in this era of hardware? And this is the era of deep learning. They kind of rediscovered, and these techniques, these old techniques using new hardware got better. And the era I want to focus on right now is the modern era where we are, because there's, in this early deep learning era, all the way back to 2021, they started to do these large language models that could generate text. But as we will see, these were actually very bad. We're going to show examples of them. They weren't that good. So most people thought, oh, general purpose AI systems are far in the future. But there are also a bunch of algorithmic inventions, notably transformers and word vectors, which I'll talk about during the era, that set the stage for the modern day where we are today. So now we're in what I call the improved era of large language models. Things that existed maybe 5 years ago, which were not so good, have gotten good very suddenly. Good in the sense that they're useful. So just putting this in a little bit of perspective, where we are, if this is the artificial intelligence techniques, we're on the left side here under machine learning. So we're in the era where we're learning patterns from data rather than inputting rules manually. And then within here, we're within the world of neural networks, which is this rediscovered technique, which has started to work really well again. And then within that, we're in the era of deep learning, which I'll explain. But eventually this involves taking this old technique of neural network and making them really big, scaling them up. So they used to be really tiny systems, these pattern matching systems, and now they're really huge. Okay, and that's where we are today. So, okay, so that's kind of an intellectual history overview. But why are people so excited about AI? Wasn't there AI 5 years ago and 10 years ago and 20 years ago? The answer is yes, but the difference is it's gotten really, really good across a huge number of domains, and it didn't used to be really, really good. So since this is an AI and Constitution, I decided to take a very innocuous and unthreatening amendment, the Third Amendment, which is prohibits the government from putting soldiers in your house and forcing you to host them, right? So apparently that was a big problem around the Revolutionary War times. And then I asked it, I copied the text, and this is GPT-4, and they said, hey, under the Third Amendment, can the governor come and just force himself at my house, right? So I'm kind of asking it to do a constitutional interpretation for a new thing that probably nobody's ever asked. And let's see what it says. And it does a pretty interesting analysis. It gives us the background of the Third Amendment. It tells us that this arose during Revolutionary War times when the British government was forcing soldiers on people's houses. But it says, no, the governor, while the governor probably cannot stay at your house without your permission, it's not because of the Third Amendment. The Third Amendment should be applied narrowly because it is specifically about soldiers, and the governor is not a soldier. Okay, so it's doing an interpretation, which is interesting. So maybe we've solved con law here. We will see that in a moment. But the larger question of why this is so exciting is that AI systems from just 2 years ago could not do anything remotely like this, not remotely. And I'm gonna show you examples because we have sort of time machines of AI systems from 2022, the distant past of 2 years ago, and we're gonna see they were much, much, much worse. So this is a remarkable moment. This is why everyone's excited. You can just take just about anything, plug it into one of these advanced systems, and this is GPT-4, not the free version, which some of you use, but the more advanced version, and get pretty much a sensible, if not entirely accurate or authoritative answer. So what's interesting is that the answer is at least pertinent to what I've asked. So this is why people are excited. In just 2 years, AI made a leap from kind of being like okay and kind of narrow to kind of generally useful in huge domains and getting better. And we're gonna see this, I have some examples in a minute, side by side. But before we get to that, I think it's important to understand the underlying technology behind GPT, right? So ChatGPT, as I said, is the chat-based interface to something under the hood called GPT. And I want you guys to just generally have an intuition for how this thing works. So the way we're gonna do it is take the words GPT itself, look at what each of the letters stand for and break that down and hopefully come out the other side with an understanding of how this technology works. So GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. So we're gonna break down each one of those words, understand what that means. So let's start with generative. Generative is a word used to describe a group of AI tasks that are associated with generating things normally associated with human creativity. So often when we think about human creativity, we think about humans creating art, music, video, and text, books, movies, poems, things of that era. So that's important to emphasize because AI is used in lots of different areas that aren't like this. AI is used to predict things, predict the weather, or drive cars. Those are not generative tasks. They're trying to do classification or prediction or other things. So when we're using AI to do something normally associated with producing human output, that's where we're talking about generative AI. So here's a picture of a generative art of Yoda in the style of the artist Edward Hopper. Here's another example. I've asked it to create Mona Lisa in the style of a Pixar character. And here it goes. It does it right before our eyes. So this is kind of amazing. Normally it would take a human to do this, but this is generative AI. It's also useful in music. So what you're about to hear is entirely AI generated. This is from a new website called Udio. The vocals, the lyrics, the music, this is all front to finish generated by AI.
Carolina, 5'5", bright blue hair and big brown eyes, sleep beneath the neon signs of some old 2-street town tonight. We don't need to talk things through, or you can cry the whole way too. Whatever feels alright to you, 'cause you got baggage, I got room, baby. Singing Carolina, oh, it's a long and winding road.
Okay, so to me that's astonishing. Those vocals sounded like real humans. That melody was pretty good. That's a song I would listen to. So that's amazing. So this is generative AI, completely from a prompt. They generated that song. That's udio.com. So why are we talking about all that stuff? Because GPT and ChatGPT is part of generative AI. It is generating something else, which is human text. So GPT is able to generate and understand human text. It uses AI to predict the next word, one word at a time based upon what's come before. So that's kind of amazing. AI, the way it currently works, literally is just predicting one word at a time. That's why ChatGPT produces one word after the other, because it's just trying to predict based upon your prompt using probability to predict what the most likely next word. And while it appears to be answering your question, it's literally just predicting one word at a time based upon what you've asked, the prompt, and what it itself has produced. You know, if it has produced the capital of France, it's going to make itself more likely to produce the next word, Paris. So it's kind of remarkable. It's unreasonably good at what it does, given its design. So that's the generative part. Let's talk about the pre-trained. So this is the P in GPT. So pre-training is really important part of the process. This was a process where you take these neural networks, you kind of unleash them on almost the entire internet, right? So you have these pattern detectors, these deep neural net pattern detectors. You release them on Wikipedia, my articles that are free for people to read, books, the New York Times, what have you, and it starts reading every single word out there and detecting the patterns of language. It detects the patterns of reasoning. It also is able to detect facts about the world. So it turns out when you release these pattern detectors, not on thousands or hundreds, but billions of documents and start to scale it up, it has these amazing properties of being able to learn, for example, that the capital of France, after reading Wikipedia pages and countless other articles, is Paris. Because these systems are trained on billions of words, books, things like that, and because they're so large in terms of the number of parameters, which are basically like the individual pattern detectors, they're known as large language models. So it used to be the case in a law school that LLM meant masters of law, but now it means large language models, but both involve training. When you hear LLM, these are large language models as opposed to the smaller ones, which were, thank you for laughing at that joke, which are out there. Okay, so that's the P. Pre-training is this incredible process that a lot of people thought wouldn't work, where if you just release these systems on the internet and show them lots and lots of words, they somehow magically learn, the English language and most other languages as well as reasoning and facts about the world. And then finally, the T part stands for transformer. So this was basically an algorithmic innovation by Google in 2017 in a famous paper called Attention is All You Need. I won't go into the technical details, although I have a paper about this, which I'll show you in a minute. But the gist of it is this invention allowed AI systems to understand the context of what was being asked. So if you have a question, what is the capital of France? The AI can look to the context words of what's being asked. So it's gonna be able to see Paris and capital and be able to do associations and then come up with France. Previously, that for various technical reasons, that was intractable, and Google solved this in 2017, and this technology, this architecture called the transformer, has transformed or taken over most of AI these days and is in the basis of GPT and most other modern large language models and things like that. So so if you want to read more about it, I have this article that's hot off the presses just last week where I explain how GPT and ChatGPT works in maybe excruciating detail. If you can't sleep at night and you want to fall asleep, read this. But just to place it in context, this is everything we've talked about before. So we have artificial intelligence, which is having computers doing tasks that are normally associated with human intelligence. We have machine learning, which is having those computers figure out the rules from data rather than manually putting in. We have neural networks, which is this pattern detection technology from the olden days, which has made a comeback and is now really good thanks to modern hardware. We have deep learning, which is taking neural networks and making them really big. And then we have the transformer architecture, is this one way of doing deep learning that Google came up with in 2017 that has kind of transformed AI, and this is where we are today. Okay, so if we look at, it's important to look at the history of GPT to understand what happened in 2022. So as many of you know, GPT-4, the current state of the art, was released by a company called, formerly a nonprofit, now a company called OpenAI, run by Sam Altman. And they took Google's transformer innovation and made some crucial improvements on top of that. But it's important to note that GPT was not always very good. So GPT-1 came out in 2018. It was bad. I played with it at the time. I was not impressed. GPT-2 came out. I was the tiniest bit impressed, but not that impressed. GPT-3 came out, and I was a little bit impressed because it could write poems, but it did not look anything like AI. It couldn't answer questions. It wasn't being coherent. The first time I was impressed, and I've been testing these for 15 years, every time these things come out, was ChatGPT in November 2022. This is the free version, GPT 3.5, that many of you used. And then we now have the most advanced version, GPT 4, which came out about a year ago in March 2023, although it's not the same model it was a year ago. It's gotten better since then. GPT 4 is important to pay attention. This is the paid state-of-the-art model. A lot of people make the mistake of they'll see something and they'll go home and try the free version and it's not that good, and then they'll walk away unimpressed. But they don't realize that the paid version, GPT-4, is actually significantly better. So it's important to understand that nuance. So let's talk about GPT-4. This is a huge advance in artificial intelligence, in my opinion. And to appreciate it now, we all take for granted that AI can read the Constitution and do an interpretation, right? Maybe not. But I want to emphasize how just 2 years ago, that was not even remotely possible. And what's interesting is that you can go back and find GPT-3 just from 2022, where it was released. It's online. It's still there. It's kind of frozen like a time machine. So we can actually ask it the same questions to just appreciate how far we've come. So GPT-3, as I mentioned, didn't really look like AI the way we think about it with ChatGPT, something that you could ask any question and maybe get back a sensible response. So let's look back, let's travel back in time all the way to 2 years ago and see what the beginning of 2022, what AI was like. So for years, I've been testing these models because they've been criticized for not having common sense. So I would ask it questions that both a toddler would know, but also that are unlikely to have been written online. So one of the things about these systems, since they read the whole internet, they can kind of simulate knowing things by just repeating. So if you asked it, these old systems, what do apples grow on? They'll know the answer trees because so many people have written that. But if you ask it something silly that a toddler would know and it's unlikely to have written, it would quickly expose its flaws. So here I asked this old model from January 2022, how many legs does an apple have? And it confidently answered, an apple has 4 legs. To which a toddler would laugh and say, what? Apples don't have legs. So this is sort of my common sense test. I also just went back and asked it the Third Amendment question that I just showed you, and it answered things like, occupants, whether of private residences or otherwise, have a right to protect themselves when disturbed by loud noises. What? So totally nonsensical. So this was kind of the state of the art in just January 2022. So we were sort of impressed by GPT-3 because it could produce lifelike text and produce, poems and stories, but it wasn't able to answer and reason. So as you saw by the legal analysis, GPT-3 from 2022 did not appear to be a shining beacon of legal intellect. So this is why we were so shocked, and this is why everyone like me, who's been studying this field for a long time, was amazed when GPT 3.5, the 3 version, came out in 2022, because it was the first system that could respond sensibly to almost anything you asked. Now, and I mean sensibly, not 100% accurately. It was at least pertinent. So if you asked it about the Third Amendment, it would give you something relevant to the Third Amendment, if not accurate. And as you saw, the previous systems would not give you anything necessarily even pertinent to what you would ask it. So getting systems to be generally conversational about any topic was a long-standing challenge in the field. The second thing that surprised everybody was the emergent properties of reasoning and problem solving. So these things were trained to literally generate one word at a time based upon the words they had generated before by reading Wikipedia and a billion documents on the internet. They were not specifically trained to reason and problem solve, and this kind of was an emergent property. So here's an example of GPT-4 kind of solving a logic puzzle. It was not trained, this is a logic puzzle I made up. It was not trained to do this. This was not on the internet. And yet by reading lots of documents, some of which, were about problem solving, it learned reasoning and logic. And that was completely unexpected to people like me. So now we sort of take it for granted, but at the time that was not the fact that we predicted that it would be able to write text. We didn't predict that it could solve problems. And as I said, another interesting prediction was that it could answer arbitrary questions about anything. So the previous ones, you'd ask it a question and it might give you a sensible answer. It might not, right? It was, now if you ask GPT-4, it can answer, you can give you at least like a coherent conversation just about anything. And that was not the case in the past. So I mentioned GPT-3 was released in November 2022 to great fanfare. So if you remember the timeline, the thing I showed you was GPT-3 from January 2022. Then just in November of that same year, we had GPT 3.5, which is ChatGPT, which could do all these things that GPT-3 couldn't do. Then just 7 months later, in March 2023, we had GPT-4, which was even smarter. So GPT 3.5, the free version, came out. It's pretty good, still had a lot of flaws. GPT-4 improved across every measure, including reasoning, problem solving, language generation. Again, it's not perfect, but it's important to just appreciate the huge changes that happened in just a year. So this is the January 2022 version of GPT-3. I asked it to write a motion to dismiss. That's its motion to dismiss. Now, just a few months later, I went and I found a random complaint on the internet. I copied the facts and I said, based on the facts of this complaint, write a motion, and then boom, off to the races. It can do it, and it can do this pretty well. And I'll talk about how well in a minute, because I don't want to, it does make mistakes, but what I'm trying to emphasize is the large leap. So the fact that it makes mistakes and is not perfect is besides the point. The emphasis is it went from not very good to pretty good in a really short time. And that's why people are excited. And the fact that this GPT happened in the area of language is what's interesting, because language, as we know, is one of the foundations to modern communication, to knowledge, and to law. So if you can make something, as opposed, art and music are very important, but language kind of foundational in a certain other way. And it allows us to build upon our knowledge base. So GPT-4, these large language models, are kind of foundational in a sense because they allow us to build new knowledge, do analysis of other things in the way other aspects of generative AI, like generative music, which is cool, do not. So I will not hesitate to say that GPT is one of the biggest breakthroughs in artificial intelligence in the last 20 years. I think it's amazing, but it is not perfect. So let us, of course, talk about the limits of GPT. This technology cannot fail. It can fail. It is not perfect. It occasionally makes up facts, especially the older version. If you type into the 3.5, it will hallucinate. It'll make up plausible sounding case names, as our friend, the ChatGPT lawyer, found out. GPT-4 is less likely to do this, but it's still not immune. Sometimes the information is out of date. It can be tricked. It can, make reasoning errors. It can reveal private data, as Professor Ohm it will remind us. There may be biases in the training data. We really don't understand how it produces the tokens, the words that it does. So there's kind of a lack of transparency and interpretability. So while amazing, there are really limits that matter, which I'm gonna talk about in a second. So where are we today? I just gave you the history. Today, we have some real competitors to GPT-4. We have Claude 3 from Anthropic. We have Gemini Ultra from Google. We have some open source or open models. Llama 3, the open model just released yesterday from Meta. AI keeps improving. I'll kind of peer into the future in a minute. The next Llama 3 400B is currently in training, which is going to be the first open model that is competitive with the paid GPT-4. So that'll be interesting. Okay, so we've seen it. AI can be used in law. How do we use it? So there's sort of two main ways. One I don't recommend, but I'm going to show you. And the other way, which is if you're going to use it, this is probably the way to do it. The way I don't recommend is using GPT-4 directly by pasting in information. And the reason is, if you have client privilege data or sensitive information, that's going to OpenAI, and unless you're part of their enterprise policy where they give you SOC 2 guarantees of security, privacy, and encryption, and that they won't train on it. Otherwise, GPT-4, OpenAI says, we will look at your stuff, or we could at least. By contrast, they have these other specialized legal systems, notably from Lexis plus AI and also West Thomson Reuters co-counsel. These are built on top of GPT-4. They use GPT-4 in the background, but they give you not only access to legal data, but security and privacy and confidentiality guarantees. So that's what I would recommend. Here's just an example of co-counsel from case text from Thomson Reuters. So it's asking GPT-4 to do the analysis on the back end, but it's using its proprietary legal knowledge base to generate the answers. So it's much less likely to hallucinate. Similarly, Lexis plus AI, I don't have a preference. I think they're both pretty good, provided you know how to use it. So I want to make a big caveat that there are huge limitations and you could go vastly wrong if you don't use it correctly. But here, is Lexis AI Plus answering questions and giving you Q&A about a recent Supreme Court case, and it does a really reliable job. GPT-4 itself, provided you don't use confidential information, is a quite reliable analyzer. Here's, it can analyze, for example, a torts pattern that I made up, and does as well, if not better, than any of my torts students. It can give you a conclusion. This is just a slip and fall case for Walmart that I made up, and it gives an analysis and then a prediction about the outcome. Which is in line with my own. Gave about a 30% chance of the plaintiff winning, which I won't get into the details, but that's a pretty good assessment. It can read contracts. One of my areas is computable contracts, so you can ask it questions about contracts. Again, pretty reliable, provided you do it right. Not perfect, though, but it shows the promise. Here's it answering scenarios in a homeowner's insurance policy and doing a pretty good job citing the actual provisions about whether something is covered or not. So let me tell you what it's fairly reliable in law today. The best use case is using it to summarize documents and asking questions, documents that you've pasted in primarily into the prompt for technical reasons, as opposed to uploading it. I won't really go into the details, but I'll just show you what I mean. Here, here's a random Supreme Court case I found. I'm literally highlighting the whole thing, copying it, and then pasting it into GPT-4 and asking about it, as opposed to either asking about it generically and having it finding out, or uploading it and asking about the uploaded document. This is the most reliable way for strange technical reasons that I can go into in the break. But it's very reliable about summarizing documents. It's much less reliable about doing legal analysis, particularly in hard cases. This is what I want to emphasize. So I showed you examples of it kind of doing interpretation, hard cases, but you want to be very, very careful. The way to think, my mental model is GPT-4 is like an excellent, the top of the class third-year law student, right? So third-year law student can be really useful producing initial drafts, doing initial research, but you probably wouldn't want to turn in the work product from a third-year law student to the judge or a client. You want to double check it, you want to verify it. So that's how to think about it. But third-year law students are extremely capable, and they can really give you a head start. They can provide a lot of productivity. So that's, I think, the mental model. All right, so let's talk about, in my last couple of minutes, given where we are, AI and constitutional law. So we've seen the frontier models like GPT-4 can read arbitrary legal text and give you reasonable sounding analysis. So what do we do about that when we have documents like the Constitution? Is this a good idea to have GPT-4 or the future GPT-5 being used to interpret constitutional documents? Is this reliable? This is something we'll talk about in the second panel, so I invite you to stay. Do lawyers or judges or others properly understand its limits and its strengths? And I think the answer is no, but it does have some strengths, which I want to talk about. But let's first highlight its limits. So remember, we asked GPT-4, we pasted in the Third Amendment. We said, can the governor of Colorado stay in my house under the Third Amendment? And it said no. The governor can't stay there, but not because of the Third Amendment. The Third Amendment applies to soldiers. It says soldiers or military, right? So, okay, it gave me a confident interpretation. So we've solved AI interpretation. Well, not so fast. Let's ask Claude. Claude is another AI. So we ask Claude, and it says, if you plug it into the Third Amendment, the Third Amendment means the governor cannot force you to house soldiers or other government officials, according to Claude. Oh, wait, so we have our first artificial intelligence circuit split here. So what I'm doing is trying to highlight the dangers of AI because it gives you the appearance that is confidently and reasonably answering your question and giving you the answer. And undoubtedly, judges out there are currently or either openly or secretly typing it in, and they're getting an answer, and they're like, "Wow, AI is smart. I'm going to defer to it. That sounds reasonable." But in the background, it was doing a value interpretation. Does soldier apply just to soldiers, right, as it literally is, or is it more broadly supposed to apply to forcible housing of government officials who are not? That's an interpretive question. Who knows? Maybe AI can do that, but right now, AI gives you the appearance of giving you solid, objective answers when, in fact, that is not what's happening. So we need to talk about this today. We will talk about this today, and we want to have a conversation to make sure that judges and lawyers understand these value choices that are secretly going on in the background non-transparently. We heard yesterday our amazing AI and ethics talk about issues of, training on past documents tends to replicate issues of the past, and that is a problem. We heard also about magnifying biases at scale. So if one judge might have a silly opinion, but if AI gives you a confident silly opinion and 1,000 judges are using that same AI system, that silly opinion gets magnified technologically. So there are lots of issues we need to talk about today. But let me leave you on an interesting positive note, because I think there's a lot of good about AI. We in academia tend to focus on all the negatives, but it is not, I'd say there are more positives than negatives with AI. And I'm gonna peer into the future. So, but before I do that, let me give you a little invitation to be skeptical, even of me, about people that aim to predict the future, particularly on longer timeframes, particularly about AI. So a lot of people will predict out what's going to happen in AI in 5 years, and they'll also make predictions about what's going to happen with respect to society or jobs or things like that. And the reality is they don't know. So they don't know, I don't know, and we often are fooled by the confidence with which Sam Altman predicts a future of abundance, or Elon Musk predicts a future of doom and gloom. But their confidence does not reflect the reality. They don't know, and I don't know, and you don't know. We're really bad at predicting the future. Well, the best we can do is make reasonable predictions in a narrow time frame, in the one to 2 year time frame, based upon current trends about the likely things that are about to happen. In my view, that's the most reliable way to predict a very narrow slice of the future. And I invite you to very much be skeptical of those who predict broad impacts on society, and particularly, beyond 5 years. But what is happening in this narrow slice based upon current trends? Large language model systems are getting larger. OpenAI is reportedly currently training GPT-5, the next generation, better than GPT-4. We don't know how better, but these systems tend to get better the bigger that they get. So GPT-3, the one in 2022, which was okay, was 175 billion parameters. That's big, but small compared to GPT-4, which was rumored to be about 10 times bigger, a trillion parameters. And GPT-5 might be 10 trillion parameters. Each one of those parameters means it's got more patterns to detect, more higher level concepts, et cetera. So these things will get better. We just don't know how much better nor what their impact on society will be. Other things that are happening, the original GPT was trained on kind of junky data sets, right? There's a lot of good stuff on the internet, but a lot of not so good stuff. In the early days, they trained it on everything. Now there's a lot of emphasis on training on higher quality data, which has been shown to dramatically improve the quality of the systems. There are new AI architectures and designs that are coming out. There's been a lot of innovation. I keep up to date with it, and there's a lot moving. So remember the transformer, that was 2017. There have been a lot of inventions on things like that. The hardware is getting faster. NVIDIA just released a new graphics processing unit, which is the core of these, which has 200 billion transistors on a single chip. We're starting to see increases in AI agents or autonomous systems. This is where you say, hey, GPT, go out, do some research for me, and then come back, right? So it's out there, or go buy me this thing on Amazon. So the system is making decisions on a series of decisions on its own, rather than this one-off back and forth thing. We're seeing longer context windows, meaning you can put more text in there. Right now, we're seeing up to 1 million, which is a lot of books you could put in there. We're seeing better planning, algorithmic improvements. In law, in particular, we're seeing more reliability. We're seeing more verification, so we don't have the ChatGPT lawyer, right? We're seeing systems that before they tell you, they'll check whether a case is real or not, and not just hallucination. However, there's still limits, and you really need to know the limits in order to use these tools correctly. If you don't use them, understanding the limits, you will make mistakes. You will think that you're getting answers when in fact you're getting subtle interpretations. So as our speakers from yesterday say, AI is bringing a lot of benefits. I think it's going to improve access to justice. It's going to improve the quality of the law. It's going to lead to better understanding, higher quality legal work for clients. But we should take this as a moment to improve the law as well. Use this moment to make AI and the law, to make the law more transparent than it's been, more equitable, less bias, allow more access to justice, make it fairer. This is a moment, I think, where we can make the law that we want to see for all of us. So thank you very much. I appreciate your time. And if you want to learn more about GPT, you can read about it there. Thank you.